Last week, the Minnesota Vikings made a big move that got everyone talking. They pushed back an important deadline related to one of their starting quarterbacks. At first, it seemed like they were preparing to use the franchise tag on Sam Darnold, but now things have taken a completely different turn. NFL insiders like Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport first suggested that the Vikings would franchise tag Darnold and then trade him to another team. But now, new reports say the exact opposite. Darnold is unlikely to be franchise tagged before today's deadline. That means he's about to become a free agent. So, what does that mean for teams looking for a quarterback? Well, they don't have to trade for him anymore. They can just sign him directly. No need to give up a first-round or second-round draft pick. Just offer him a contract, and he's yours. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Some reports say that Darnold himself asked the Vikings not to use the franchise tag on him. Why? Because he wants the freedom to choose his next team. And honestly, it makes sense. The quarterback market is packed this year. Big names like Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, and Justin Fields are all available. If the Vikings had tagged Darnold, his options would have been very limited. With only a few teams still in need of a starting quarterback, Darnold knows he has to act fast. One of those teams, the Tennessee Titans, is expected to draft a quarterback with their number, first overall pick. That leaves even fewer options for him. I know a lot of Raiders fans won't like this idea, but let's face reality. The quarterbacks currently on this roster are not the long-term answer. Gardner Minshew had his chance. It didn't work. Aidan O'Connell? He had opportunities too, but struggled with injuries and inconsistency. Sure, he had one solid game, but overall, he hasn't proven he's a reliable starting quarterback. At best, he's a good backup. Now, think about this. The Raiders were ready to go all in on Matthew Stafford, a 37-year-old quarterback in decline. That alone speaks volumes. It tells you exactly how much confidence they have in the guys they already have. And let's not ignore the facts. The Raiders' front office has already said they plan to add competition at quarterback. So, if that's the case, why not consider Sam Darnold? Why Darnold might fit in Vegas. People underestimate what Darnold did in Minnesota last year. Yes, the Vikings were a decent team, but their offensive line was banged up all season. Star tackle Brian O'Neill missed multiple games. Christian Darrisaw was out for most of the year. The Vikings even had to trade for a lineman mid-season just to stay afloat. Yet, despite all of that, Darnold still performed well. Imagine what he could do in a better situation. And the Raiders? Their situation isn't bad at all. They have solid weapons. Brock Bowers, Trey Tucker, Jacoby Myers. A top draft pick, which could be used on a wide receiver or a franchise left tackle. Plus, coaching matters, and the Raiders now have a legit coaching staff that can maximize a quarterback's potential. The reality of quarterback contracts. Some might argue Darnold isn't worth $35 to $40 million a year. But let's put that into perspective. Trevor Lawrence makes $60 million a year. Dak Prescott, also $60 million. Tua Tagovailoa and Jared Goff, two average quarterbacks, are pulling in $53 million a year. In today's market, $35 to $40 million for a starting quarterback isn't crazy. When we talk about quarterback salaries, let's get one thing straight. $53 million a year is the going rate for an average starter in today's NFL. Dak Prescott, Tua Tagovailoa, Jared Goff, none of these guys are elite, yet they're all making over $50 million per year. Now, Sam Darnold isn't a top 5 quarterback, we know that. But does he have upside? Absolutely. Remember when people said Baker Mayfield wasn't good? Or that Geno Smith would never be a quality starter? Even Jared Goff was written off at one point, but when these guys were put into the right system, they started winning games. And speaking of winning games, last season, with a strong offensive scheme, Sam Darnold went 14-3. Let that sink in. When was the last time the Raiders had that? Ask yourself this. When was the last time a Raiders quarterback won 13-plus games? In the last 30 years, Which Raiders quarterback has put up 4,300 yards, 35 touchdowns, and only 12 interceptions? That kind of season doesn't happen by accident. Darnold was stuck in a bad system. Now he's ready. Let's not forget, Darnold started his career with the Jets. And let's be real, the Jets were a disaster. Bad coaching, bad management, no real offensive system. But when he landed in San Francisco, under Kyle Shanahan, things changed. He learned under one of the best offensive minds in football. Then, with Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota, he got even better. So now the question is, what's next for Darnold? Should the Raiders take the shot? The Raiders have two choices. Take a risk in the draft. Go all in on a rookie like Shedeur Sanders or Jackson Dart at the 6th overall pick. But what if they bust? Then you've wasted a premium pick and set the franchise back. Sign Darnold to a 3-year, $120 million deal. $40 million per year. No draft picks lost. No long-term risk. And if it works, you have a franchise quarterback without breaking the bank. At this point, the Minnesota Vikings are moving on, and Darnold knows that there aren't many starting jobs left. That means the Raiders could get him at a reasonable price. For years, the Raiders have played it safe when it comes to quarterbacks. They've settled for mediocrity, hoping an average passer would somehow take them to the next level. Sure, Derek Carr had his moments, but after that 2016 injury, he was never quite the same. By 2019, it was clear that the Raiders needed to move on, but they didn't. Instead, they rolled with Jimmy Garoppolo, Aidan O'Connell, and Gardner Minshew, and look where that got them. 5 to 6 wins a season, every single year. If the goal is to actually win, something has to change. And maybe that change is Sam Darnold. Why Sam Darnold makes sense. Some fans might hesitate at the idea of paying Darnold $40 million a year. But let's break it down. NFL contracts are flexible. The Raiders can structure the deal so his cap hit is lower in the years he plays, spreading out the financial impact. If it doesn't work out, you move on. Worst case scenario, you eat some dead cap for 2 years and draft a new QB. That's a small price to pay for the chance at real success. Now, if Aaron Rodgers became available, that's a different story. Rodgers is the better option, hands down. His contract is manageable, and he's a proven winner. But let's be real. Landing Rodgers isn't a guarantee. So, if the choice is between signing Darnold or reaching for an unproven rookie at number 6, isn't Darnold the smarter bet? What happens if the Raiders still struggle? Let's say the worst-case scenario happens. The Raiders bring in Darnold, and he flops. Guess what? That actually wouldn't be a disaster. The 2025 draft class has some elite quarterback prospects. If Darnold struggles, the Raiders will be in prime position to draft a new franchise QB. Darnold could even serve as a bridge quarterback for 1 or 2 seasons while the new guy develops. Either way, the Raiders have options. And options are what winning teams create. The Raiders are also looking at a new RB quarterback isn't the only focus right now. According to NFL insider Ryan Fowler, the Raiders are bringing in Boise State RB Ashton Jeanty for a visit. Jeanty is a 2-time All-American. He rushed for 2,600 yards last season, the second most in FBS history. The Bears and Raiders are both interested. This makes sense. The Raiders' run game was a disaster last year. They gambled on Zamir White, and let's be honest, it didn't work. Bringing in a workhorse back like Jeanty could finally give the offense the balance it's been missing. Bottom line, the Raiders can't afford to play it safe anymore. The days of settling for mediocrity need to end. Whether it's at quarterback or running back, the Raiders must take some risks if they ever want to compete at the highest level. Is Sam Darnold that risk? Maybe. But one thing's for sure. Doing nothing guarantees another losing season. The Las Vegas Raiders have a major issue. They don't have a single true playmaker at running back. For years, the team has struggled to find a reliable RB1. They put their faith in Zamir White, but let's be real, it didn't work. He lacks elite vision, quickness, and agility. Sure, he has decent speed in a straight line, But in the NFL, you don't just run in a straight line. You need to be dynamic, and White simply isn't. Right now, the Raiders' running back room is a mess. Zamir White? Not the answer. Alexander Mattison? Free agent, unreliable. Amir Abdullah? Just average. Dylan Lobb? Still unproven. Could be a special teams guy at best. This team needs an upgrade, and that's why the Raiders are bringing in Boise State's Ashton Jeanty for a top 30 visit. Is Ashton Jeanty the answer? Jeanty is a two-time All-American who rushed for 2,600 yards last season, the second most in a single FBS season. The Raiders and Bears are both showing interest, which means Jeanty isn't slipping past the first round. But should the Raiders use a first-round pick on him? That's the big question. Learn from history. Don't repeat it. Bringing in an elite running back can work, but only if the team is already built for success. Look at the Philadelphia Eagles when they signed Saquon Barkley. That move made sense because the Eagles already had checkmark, the best offensive line in the NFL. Checkmark, a strong defensive line checkmark, top-tier receivers, checkmark, a reliable quarterback, checkmark, a well-structured system. For them, adding a superstar RB was the final piece. Now, compare that to the New York Giants when they drafted Barkley. At the time, they had a terrible offensive line. No real identity on offense, poor roster management. And what happened? Barkley struggled for years. Not because he wasn't talented, but because the team wasn't built for him to succeed. This is exactly the situation the Raiders need to avoid. Should the Raiders draft a running back at number 6? At 6th overall, the Raiders have several options. They could go with a dominant defensive player like Missouri's Darius Robinson. They could draft a quarterback if the right one is available. Or they could gamble on an elite playmaker like Jeanty. But if the offensive line isn't fixed, then bringing in a star running back won't change much. The Raiders must build the foundation first, because even the best running backs can't run without a solid offensive line. The Raiders' draft dilemma: who should they pick? The Las Vegas Raiders are at a crossroads. They need firepower, but where should they invest their 6th overall pick? Sure, they could grab a top-tier wide receiver, someone like Travis Hunter, Tetairoa McMillan, or Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State. That would boost the offense and give them another weapon. Or they could go defense and grab a dominant pass rusher or run-stuffing defensive tackle, a move that could immediately improve their defense. But what about the running back situation? Running back, a need, but not the biggest need. No question, the Raiders desperately need a running back. But should they use a top 10 pick on one? If they go that route, they can't afford to miss. If they draft the 8th best running back, they better grab another one later, because the Raiders cannot afford another bust. Ashton Jeanty is a top prospect, but some scouts have concerns about his size. At 5 feet 8 inches or 5 feet 9 inches, he's several inches shorter than elite backs like Bijan Robinson or Saquon Barkley. Can he handle the workload of an every-down NFL back? That's the big question. Shedeur Sanders, is he ready for the NFL? One of the biggest stories coming out of the draft process is about Shedeur Sanders, and not in a good way. Reports say that after meeting with 2 top 10 teams in need of a quarterback, Sanders left a bad impression. The feedback? He didn't seem to care what teams thought of him. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. His approach wasn't professional. He didn't take the meeting seriously. That's not what you want to hear about a potential franchise quarterback. Teams expect a high level of preparation, leadership, and professionalism, especially from a QB. If Sanders isn't putting in the work off the field, teams might hesitate to draft him high. So, what should the Raiders do? With the 6th overall pick, the Raiders must make the right choice. They need a game changer, but they can't afford to take the wrong player at the wrong time. Wide receiver could be a smart move. Defensive line, a rock-solid option. Running back, only if they're convinced they're getting a superstar. Quarterback, if Shedeur Sanders' attitude is a concern, the Raiders better think twice. One thing is certain, this pick will shape the Raiders' future. Will they make the right move? We'll find out soon enough. Shedeur Sanders, a rising star or a draft day mystery. The NFL draft is all about potential, talent, and mindset. And when teams invest in a franchise quarterback, they want a player who's ready to lead. But Shedeur Sanders' draft stock is raising some serious questions. Reports are coming out that Sanders' interviews with top teams were underwhelming. He didn't seem eager to impress. He didn't approach the meetings professionally. Teams didn't get the sense that he was serious about the process. Now, let's be clear. There was no drama, no disrespect, and no attitude issues. But in the high-stakes world of the NFL, teams want players who take every opportunity seriously. The talent versus the concerns. There's no doubt that Shedeur has talent. He's been in the spotlight since he was a teenager, and he's handled it well. But when it comes to pure quarterback ability, scouts are seeing a few concerns. Deep ball accuracy? Inconsistent. Arm strength? Not elite. Mobility? Good, but not great. Pocket presence? Needs improvement. For a top 10 pick, teams expect a combination of arm talent, athleticism, and leadership. And some are wondering if Sanders has all three at an elite level. Could Sanders fall in the draft? If Sanders doesn't go in the top 10, things could get interesting. The Steelers at 21? Maybe. The Dolphins? Unlikely since they have Tua. The Rams? A possibility if they're thinking about life after Stafford. But what if no one takes him in round 1? Let me know what you think in the comments. Should the Raiders draft Sanders or go in another direction?